Hello, my name is Tony. Eon, the official producers of the James Bond movies, chose to kill him in the last outing. Currently, there seems to be little possibility he'll be coming back anytime soon, if at all. But should he resurrect this lifelong fan of the character, novels and film franchise, me, that is, in case you were wondering, won't be watching. I never saw it as a question of will James Bond die, rather one of contemplating and experiencing just how James Bond will not die. How is he going to get out of this seemingly impossible situation? How will he beat the odds, cheat death? Once you've fucked that essential component up, you've fucked it all. So, No Time to Die, when clearly there was some time to die in the end, was the final nail in the coffin of the franchise. Bond may return, Bond may be back, but I won't. The instant he was vaporized, obliterated to atoms, it was over. I'm done. The only other Bond movie I've reviewed thus far on the channel is Roger Moore's debut showing Live and Let Die. Not perhaps an obvious choice for some, but was for me. License to Kill then isn't perhaps the obvious choice to make either, but there are reasons, aren't there always? Valued Patreon patron and channel supporter Numinous is a fan of Timothy Dalton's James Bond, and feels the actor and his two films are somewhat overlooked, ill-served in the broad scheme of things. In both these areas, I am in accord. I rate Dalton highly, and I too believe he doesn't get the due consideration and attention he deserves. Something there to address then. Why not The Living Daylights? I like that film well enough, it's great, but License to Kill is the one in which Dalton nails the literary character in ways that even Connery, Lazenby and Moore never did. It would be 20 years later before the groundwork laid by Dalton was capitalized upon successfully, at least critically and financially, when Daniel Craig took on the mantle in the Casino Royale reboot. Dalton and his interpretation of Bond were ahead of their time, which is interesting considering he drew strongly on Fleming's archaic 1950s character template. Some things, it seems, are truly timeless, like alpha male heroes, with a hint of tweaking and updating here and there. Dalton was considered for Bond way back in '72 when Connery finally jumped the good ship Eon after Diamonds Are Forever. Legend has it he was offered the part, but at the age of 25 turned it down on the basis he felt he was too young. He was approached again when For Your Eyes Only was in pre-production in 1980, and Roger Moore and Cubby Broccoli were playing backgammon to haggle over money. At this point he felt Eon weren't seriously trying to replace Moore, so counted himself out. When Moore officially retired from the role in 1986, Dalton was making some lousy, arrant, tripe-titled Brenda star. He asked for 6 weeks' grace to finish making the film, but Eon said they couldn't wait and instead hired Pierce Brosnan. Luckily for Bond movie fans and the world in general, when news of Brosnan's casting leaked, the makers of the TV series Remington Steele, in which he was starring, renewed the series to which he was contractually obligated, ruling him out, so Dalton got the gig. It was sadly just a temporary reprieve, and Brosnan would eventually take over from Dalton to make 4 bland and mediocre Bond movies for the MTV demographic. The character of James Bond would be reduced a little more than a showroom dummy being pinballed around the world while shit happened around him. Ah well, some you win. So License to Kill, it was a bit different, scaled down, lower production values than usual, more like a contemporary revenge thriller with some suitably hair-raising stunts and action sequences factored in, and a villain who had a caper on the go that was both believable and within the realms of feasibility. James Bond, Timothy Dalton, is in Key West to act as best man at the wedding of his old CIA operative friend Felix Leiter, David Hedison reprising the role he last played in Live and Let Die. Before the wedding, they get involved in an operation to bring down drug cartel supremo Fran Sanchez, Robert Davi. After capturing Sanchez, they make it to the church on time by parachute, as you do when punctuality is an absolute must. But on his way to be incarcerated pending trial, Sanchez escapes with the help of corrupt DEA agent Kilifer Everett McGill. His henchman Dario Benicio del Toro and his crew invade Leiter's home, murder his new wife Della, Priscilla Barnes, and abduct Leiter. At an aquarium owned by his associate Milton Crest, Anthony Zerb, Sanchez lowers Leiter into a pool of sharks. When Bond learns of Sanchez's escape, he races to Leiter's home, only to find Della dead and Leiter dumped there, seriously maimed and barely alive. A note pinned to him reads, he disagrees disagreed with something that ate him. Bond swears revenge and, assisted by Leiter's friend, the charter boat fisherman Sharky Frank McRae, begins his own investigation. After he lowers Killifer into the shark pool in anger, M. Robert Brown turns up and orders Bond to an assignment in Istanbul that he is conveniently neglected to turn up for. M insists that Sanchez is nothing to do with MI6. Frustrated, Bond resigns, his license to kill is revoked, and he takes off alone to pursue his obsessive mission of revenge against Sanchez, ignoring the sagely advice of old Uncle Rog in For Your Eyes Only. I'm not going to explore the plot content in much more depth than that. That's the setup, and the rest of the film sees Bond teaming up with an ex-army pilot and DEA informant, Pam Bouvier, Carey Lowell, along with some unofficial support from Q, Desmond Llewellyn, to infiltrate the Sanchez organization and disrupt and dismantle it from within. Instead of analysing the narrative as such, my preference is to focus instead on the performance of Dalton and his representation of Bond, and consider why this film is of more significant influence and importance in the context of the franchise than we might first imagine it to be. I'm also intrigued by those things it draws on for inspiration and how it utilises them and to what effect. Dalton was, first and foremost, a big fan of Fleming's original novels and short stories. He wanted his Bond to be darker, edgier, not so much of a globe-trotting playboy with an endless supply of quips and one-liners at his disposal, an insatiable libido, instantly irresistible to women, with the ability to reverse engineer lesbianism. More a burned-out, state-sanctioned killer, cursed with an addictive personality who smoked shitloads of cigarettes, gambled and drank alcohol to help cope with the near-impossible demands made of him in an incredibly violent world. His wolfish looks and clipped manner, his capacity for conveying restless inner intensity, certainly reinforces the impression that here is a predatory man who could quite casually kill you for real. On screen, when he puts someone down, he does so with a cold gleam in his eye and a faint smirk of grim satisfaction. There was less humour, but then Fleming's Bond wasn't much of a one for wisecracks. That was an invention of the movies, a character trait designed to make him more relatable, more likeable. And it worked brilliantly. That's not to imply that Dalton's Bond doesn't have a sense of humour or that he isn't a womanizer, because that's not the case. These elements are now just positioned a little further back in the mix. Why Dalton is so significant is twofold. He is the most faithful on-screen version of the character to that of the original literary incarnation. He also took the character to places he hadn't been before, and I don't mean geographically. For the first time, Bond goes full rogue male. He has resigned, he has no backup, no official support, he's not working for or with any government agency. Without a license to kill, he is just an unsanctioned murderer with his own agenda. Now, although there have always been sacrificial lambs in the Bond movies, this time there are three. One does live, admittedly. Never had it been this personalised. I believe we are intended to imagine his motivation and obsession stem in part from Bond's own painfully short marital experience. His wife is mentioned very briefly in an exchange between Felix and Della by way of some explanation just after she throws Bond her wedding garter. What happened to Bond, check out on Her Majesty's Secret Service, is mirrored by what befalls Della and Felix, touches a nerve and a very raw one. Later, in the Craig films, the increasingly troubled and psychologically conflicted characterization would become prominent. I can't remember exactly how many times Bond resigns, goes off-grid, disappears, is presumed dead in those flicks, but it felt like a recurrent theme. License to Kill is the predecessor of all that. By the time we get to Craig, after the relative mundanity of Brosnan and the success of Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight take on rebooting Batman, there was potentially a public appetite for a darker, humanly flawed James Bond. Dalton just missed the boat by 2 decades before it became an in vogue thing. Like they say, timing is everything. Although License to Kill is not drawn directly from any Fleming novel or short story, it uses certain characters and events as flesh on the bones. A character named Milton Crest appeared in the short story The Hildebrand Rarity. Leiter does get fed to the sharks in the Live and Let Die novel. The character of Sharky is Quarrel or Quarrel Jr. by any other name, probably closer to the original Quarrel, as Sharky winds up as one more sacrificial lamb on the altar of Bond tropes. The notion of infiltrating an organization, gaining trust of the villain, and then sowing the seeds of mistrust in his paranoid nut, whilst engineering chaos to destroy it, is taken from Kurosawa's Yojimbo and Leone's A Fistful of Dollars, and of course Fleming's last Bond novel, The Man with the Golden Gun. A further link with Live and Let Die is to be found in the villains. Both Mr. Big and Sanchez are major league drug lords. In the 80s, the TV series Miami Vice, which ran from 1984 to 1989, the year License to Kill was released, and Brian De Palma's loud, hyperactive, and punishingly violent Scarface from 1983 were big hits with the people. They popularized the utility of drug trafficking and prostitution in entertainment media. My suspicion is when considering what were the current trends drawing in the punters of the day, Eon picked up on this. Previously, with Live and Let Die, they embraced blaxploitation. The Man with the Golden Gun channeled chop socky flicks. The Spy Who Loved Me took to the sea on the back of Jaws. Moonraker jumped the Star Wars mania bandwagon. License to Kill did drugs, and any number of vigilante revenge potboilers, because who doesn't like a good revenge movie? It came out in a long hot summer. I watched it in a cinema that usually had the ambient internal temperature of the Antarctic on a particularly cold day in winter. No need for aircon here, sonny. I sweated my fucking balls off. It was released up against a quite daunting slate of heavy hitters. Lethal Weapon 2, Ghostbusters 2, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, and Tim Burton's Batman. It was the 7th biggest earner in the UK that year and the 12th worldwide. In the overarching structure of the Bond franchise, it does look and feel quite small, on a par with Craig's Quantum of Solace in that respect, but much more composed, entertaining, and attractively executed than that film. The violence was more explicit, earning it a 15 certificate from the BBFC, and Dalton's Bond gets dirty, battered, broken, and bleeds up close, perhaps for the first time since Connery in Dr. No. Bond girls, or women, or persons, or whatever, are represented by ultra-cute Carey Lowell and fabulously dusky Talisa Soto as Sanchez's reluctant and abused girlfriend. Robert Davi is lethal and reptilian as Sanchez, one of the cruelest and most sadistic of Bond villains. And a young Benicio del Toro impressively seethes as the quirky but acridly vicious henchman Dario. It was good to see David Hedison reprise his role as Leiter, another link back to Live and Let Die. This being a Bond movie, there are still plenty of daring stunts, and the climactic chase with burning oil tankers and Stinger missiles is a terrific watch. And of course, this being a Bond flick, there are still moments of absurdity, sparser and toned down as they are. Director John Glenn rates it as the best Bond film he made. For Your Eyes Only is my sneaking preference, but that has dated quite badly, whereas License to Kill is aged much more gracefully in my jaded opinion. Glenn also thinks that Dalton is the actor who comes closest to the Ian Fleming vision and concept of the character, and in that I must agree with him. In a ranking of my favourite screen Bonds, mine would go Connery more than Dalton. He played it as straight as he was allowed to and was magnetically watchable in his two films, and I like those two films a lot. Now there would have been a third as per his contract, but MGM and Eon found themselves embroiled in a legal battle which lasted for 4 years. When that concluded in 1993, Dalton felt his time had passed and didn't want to do it anymore. Thus we got Brozza, the techno-pop Wooden Eye, and 3 other glitzy nags to sit through. Fucking great. Thank you as always for your time and attention. Do whatever you want to do next. Hit like, don't like, comment, subscribe, be a patron of my Patreon thing, make a financial contribution via the thanks button, which always gives me that nice toasty glow in the wallet area. I'll be back, as a matter of fact. Sorry, Gary Glitter references are really not cool, my bad. And when I am, it will be evidenced by something I do. Right. Soon, pilgrim, soon.